and how to turn that into action, into results. And that's what I've spent my career doing, winning transformative policies and programs that make a difference in people's everyday lives. Stronger protections for renters, higher minimum wages, better public transit, and progressive revenue to fund the public goods and services that make our city more equitable and more just. And I believe this is exactly the kind of experience that our city needs in this moment. I know I don't have all the answers ready-made, but I am a problem solver who knows how to listen, bring people together, work across differences, and get results. And that's what I will do as our next mayor.
All right, thank you both so much for those opening statements. We are going to start with the topic of affordability, housing, taxes, all the things, right, related to that. And Mayor Harrell, I'm going to start with you. I'm sure you've heard this quote before. I won't give the full one because I don't know if young ears are listening, but the rent is too high. Sure, you can fill in the blank, and even so-called affordable housing often isn't. A grocery worker told me that her $1,300 a month studio leaves her with little left over. The Seattle Times recently reported nearly 11% of affordable units, more than 2,700 homes built with public dollars, are sitting empty. You've been mayor for 4 years. What changes will you make to ensure that more people can rent those available units and make them truly affordable? You have 90 seconds.
Sure. Recognizing this issue and recognizing even in the country, this is a trend that's been going on. We've done several things. The first thing, we have to control what we can control, and that is the permit process, making sure that construction is there. We have to address the vacancy issue by making sure we have adequate inventory, and then we have to look at why they are vacant. Often they are vacant because some of the conditions are just not safe. People are choosing not to live there. If you look at the renters assistance money that we put in the budget, going around the communities talking about what they need most, and so we're actually giving money to renters to make sure that they don't become homeless. We're building construction, make sure there's adequate inventory out there. And we placed in our budget $170 million in what we're calling state stability and preservation opportunities. So we're meeting affordable housing developers where they are, listening to them, making sure their needs are met, and making sure our funding mechanisms are meeting them where they are, and is proving good dividends in terms of what we're trying to accomplish.
Okay. Candidate Wilson, what's your response to that?
Yeah, I mean, this is such an important question, and it really speaks to the question of how do we spend our public dollars wisely and most effectively, and unfortunately we haven't been doing that. So recently we've seen 1,300 affordable units sold off because the affordable housing sector is in crisis. That's a permanent loss to our affordable housing stock. And as you mentioned, we have large vacancies across the affordable housing sector. And part of the reason for that is that we've been focusing on maximizing the number of units. And for that reason, we built too many small unit studios at the kind of 60 to 80% AMI level, when the real need is for family-sized units and also for units at the deepest levels of affordability, 0 to 30% AMI. So we really need to look at holistically at how we are spending our public money and making sure that we are building and operating the kind of affordable housing that is actually needed in our community.
Okay, thank you. Candidate Wilson, I'd like to begin with you. More names were recently added to the Leaves of Remembrance in Seattle. Each bronze leaf memorializes people who died while they were unhoused. The number of people counted as homeless has continued to increase every year, despite hundreds of millions of dollars spent. The 2025 budget calls for spending $139 million this year on homelessness. The mayor is proposing even more to be spent next year. Money has not resolved this problem and lowered the numbers of people living on the street. So what other ideas do you have?
Well, it takes money, but I think, again, this goes back to the question of how are we spending our money most effectively. And the problem that I see right now is that all of that money that we're spending on the homelessness crisis, we are actually spending it very inefficiently. So as you mentioned, we've actually lost shelter capacity every single year that our current mayor has been in office, and we have thousands more people sleeping unsheltered today than we did 4 years ago. So we're spending money moving encampments around the city, and I've talked to folks in neighborhoods around the city where there are large encampments, and they say, well, it's going to be swept next week, but we know the people will be back soon. And that's because we're not actually getting people inside with the support they need to be successful there. So I think we can do a lot by changing the way that we're spending the revenue we currently have to make sure that we are actually creating those realistic paths to shelter and stability, which currently we have dead ends, and that's the problem.
So a follow-up, you have proposed 4,000 new units. in the next 4 years. How will you pay for that without sacrificing all the other programs the city needs?
Again, it's a matter, I mean, we're spending on things that are important, such as, for example, treatment for drug addiction, right? But if you're trying to spend money on drug addiction, but that person is still living on the street, they're not going to be successful there. So it's really a matter of linking up the systems that we already have. So, for example, if someone's in shelter, in permanent supportive housing, let's make sure that the services that they need are available on site or nearby so that we're not requiring someone to go across the city to a clinic that's only open for a couple hours, right? So it's really a matter of getting the systems we have to work together better to get people inside. Building those 4,000 units, a lot of that can be done with existing money, but some of it will require new funds as well. And so that will be working with the state to get new funding and also looking at progressive revenue options here in the city.
Mayor Harrell, your response.
Well, you didn't hear a plan. And this very simple question would be, how much would that cost? We've run the numbers. That would be north of $500 million. This is what we've done, and this is what we will do. Number one is we've put forth the largest budget in the city's history for housing. That's $350 million. I also proposed, and the voters passed, a $970 million for affordable housing. If you look at the number of shelter referrals, accepted shelter referrals in 2023 as an example, 2,204 people accepted shelter. Homelessness can be solved. Let's be very clear. And that's why I'm pushing on a regional solution. What we've done is we've set a national standard, actually. About 50% of the people that we've moved from a shelter have accepted housing. The answer is permanent supportive housing. Putting someone in a tent or a tiny home is a temporary fix. That's like putting someone in the emergency room. And her plan, if you want to call that a plan, since she will never talk about what it will cost, she will never talk about that, is a lofty idea, but what we're doing will solve homelessness. We have to build permanent supportive housing. We have to give wraparound services. These are people I grew up with in this city. I know how hard it is to survive. So our plan will spend another $1 billion moving forward. We will accelerate the permit process. We've exempted a lot of special projects, and you see we're building units. That is the answer.
Well, let me ask you, though, under your plan right now, we have a young little girl who was sexually molested by a guy in a tent, kidnapped. This plan does not seem to work, at least for that family. Why is there a girl in these tent cities, and why is there not more security? What's your response?
My response is this. One reason why we get criticized for removing encampments and offering shelter is because it's dangerous. You just described, David, why it's so dangerous. 62% of the crimes have been reduced. But shots fired have been reduced. Fires, 47% have been reduced. One reason why that is, we think it's inhumane for someone to be in an encampment without wraparound services. That is exactly our strategy. When she talks about 4,000 emergency units, we already have 19 tiny home villages. We have 2 sanctioned encampments, and that's why I'm forcing regionalism. I want the whole region to step up. The answer is permanent supportive housing with security in place to make sure lives are protected, and that's why we don't, best practice are not the shelter kind of setups that she's talking about.
Ken Wilson, I'd like you to respond to the mayor, please.
Yeah, sure. For one thing, we do need more tiny house villages. And part of how I envision creating 4,000 new units is actually filling some of those empty studio units in affordable housing buildings that are currently vacant. And, you know, currently the approach that the mayor's administration is taking is pushing people around the city without actually getting them inside. And that really contributes to our public safety crisis as well, because now you have people who aren't even sleeping in a tent, and they've been destabilized. So if they're dealing with substance use disorder or mental illness, instead of sleeping in a tent, maybe they're sleeping in the doorway of a small business, and maybe they have a mental health crisis and they smash the windows or behave aggressively toward customers. So a lot of the problematic behavior that we're seeing in business districts around the city is really traced to our failure to meaningfully address the homelessness crisis and get people inside.
And what do you do if someone doesn't want to go to a shelter or a tiny home and they want to stay there?
You know, the vast majority of people, when meaningful support is offered, will take it. And this is something that we know because we have had successful programs to resolve encampments. So during the pandemic, several nonprofits teamed up to create the Just Care program that successfully resolved large encampments downtown. And that approach was continued by WashDOT's right-of-way program, resolving encampments near highways. A very large percentage of people were successfully brought inside and actually stayed there for the long term. So we know what works. We're just not doing that. We're just not funding that here in Seattle.
Do you oppose the mayor's care teams that are going out and contacting these people?
So outreach is great, but what the Unified Care Team is doing is moving people around without actually getting them the support that they need. So we have various teams which are going out and doing outreach, and that is good, but all of that needs to be coordinated in a more effective way so that we're actually moving people inside.
I'd like the mayor to have a chance to respond.
Well, I'd like to hear some answers, because you asked her the question, how will she pay for it? There was not an answer. You asked, will she force people to move? There was not an answer. You see, this is what an executive has to do. An executive have to realize that in encampments there could be a syringe. It could be around a park where people are unsafe. An executive has to realize that, yes, lead with passion, lead with love, but there are tough decisions that have to be made. Half of our budget is toward public safety. So not only do I have to treat this person, I have to protect other people. She will not say what she will do. And that's why I talk about this campaign is about trust. I will clean streets if I have to make sure they are safe. I will offer housing to everyone. We do not move people from A to B. If you look at 85% of the tiny homes in the entire county are in Seattle. Look, 63% of the shelter is in Seattle. Our answer to solve the problem is regional, getting their resources, their land, and that's what we're doing. We're doing it as a best practice. You look at Houston, for example. We're looking at what works. She's putting people in the emergency room, and she won't talk about if she will move people, and she will take us back to what we were dealing with 4 years ago, and that's what I don't want to happen to Seattle.
Okay, we have a lot of topics to get through, so let's get to our next one. This question comes from someone who emailed us, a small landlord, mom and pop, having a home that she rents out. State law currently caps rent hikes at 7% plus inflation, so 10%. Candidate Wilson, you've called for finding ways to discourage increases above 5%. She's worried that if rent increases are limited further, she could end up in a financial bind. How would you strike the balance, keeping housing affordable while making sure small mom and pop landlords don't get pushed out?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is an important question, and when we look at our landlord-tenant laws, it's always a question of that balance, right? So the state law, as you mentioned, prohibits landlords from raising the rent more than 7% plus the rate of inflation, so that up to 10%. That's still a very large rent increase. So if you're renting an apartment for example, $2,000 a month, that's a $200 a month rent increase. That's the kind of rent increase that displaces a family, right? And they don't know where to go. So what I've talked about is strengthening a law that we have on the books in Seattle called the Economic Displacement Relocation Assistance Law, which basically says that if a landlord raises the rent more than 10% and a tenant moves out because they can't afford it, the landlord needs to pay 3 times the monthly rent as relocation assistance. So I've suggested that we should bump that threshold down to 5%. So this would not prevent landlords from raising the rent more than 5%, but it would just disincentivize it. And I think this is a reasonable approach, and we'll talk about it, right? We'll convene stakeholders and we'll figure out what's going to work.
Okay, Mayor, do you support that kind of idea of capping at 5% or discouraging it by maybe lowering that threshold?
So the problem with many of her ideas is she can't do it. That has to be rooted in state law, period. Okay. So when you look at some of the remedies, such as the 10%, that was a state law that we advocated for.
And just to clarify, state law, but in terms of that relocation fund, you do have control over that.
And you see that we've been probably, as a city, I won't even take credit for it. As a city, we have been extremely generous and sympathetic and empathetic toward renters' rights, and we should be proud of that. In fact, I just announced last week we put in about $11 million in our current budget for renters' protections and support systems for renters. So we understand the rent is too high. We fully get that. So what we're doing, much like what she sort of described, is we meet with affordable housing developers, we meet with tenants, we meet with landlords to make out a good suite of policies. And yes, we don't want anyone to become homeless. That's why we put so much money in our $350 million budget. And I will repeat, that is the highest in the city's history to make sure that renters are protected against egregious landlord activity.
Okay, 30 seconds if you'd like to reply.
Well, I mean, I'll just reiterate that the city does have the power to do what I'm suggesting, and I haven't had time to dig through the current proposed budget with a fine-tooth comb since it just came out today, but I did notice that tenant services, which is legal aid for tenants and other support to prevent eviction, actually has a cut from the last budget cycle, cut by 40%, has been retained in this budget, so that's going to leave the organizations that provide that assistance struggling.
All right. Well, speaking of the new budget, Mayor, you announced the Anti-displacement and Reparations Housing Fund, $80 million to support families in our city who are discriminated against in the housing sector. How would this program work, and how many people might be able to take advantage of it?
You know, I believe that our city is now engaging in a very open discussion about redlining and race. And I think that rather than give it lip service, our values have to demonstrate this. That's why we are aggressive in supporting this amount. So there are many disparity studies to look at African American families known as descendants of slaves, how they were directly financially impacted. So now we're looking at how do we address that. And we'll look at many studies that have occurred. I was a victim of redlining myself. My mother and father lived in a certain area because that was the area they could live in. So if you look at that coupled with the predatory renting legislation that we passed, we're addressing it head on in the future to make sure that, again, we look at the disparity studies, those who are impacted directly, and whether it's down payment assistance, rental assistance, we're going to be the city to put this to be in one of the first cities in the nation to address the egregious housing policies that people fell victim to here in Seattle.
Is this a policy idea you would support, Candidate Wilson?
I think it's a very interesting proposal, and I know that not a lot of details out yet as to how exactly it would work. I know this is also something that's being looked at the state level, and a couple of bills have been passed, a covenant homeownership bill, right, to start to address this problem. So, and you know, in this campaign, I've been talking with a lot of different folks and organizations in the Black community about you know, ways to repair the harm, and you know, there's definitely a diversity of views about the best way to do that. But I think this is a very interesting proposal, and I look forward to continuing those conversations.
That's a yes. It's interesting. I think we all could agree it's interesting. I'd like your support.
I'd like to see more details.
Mayor Harrell, you're proposing a 0.1% sales tax increase to fund public safety priorities in Seattle. Between state and local taxes, Seattle residents are already paying some of the highest sales taxes in the country. You know, public safety is close to my heart, but why a sales tax increase?
Well, we have to recognize that, yes, it is a regressive tax, and so we have to study it very closely, and we made the decision that this is the right thing to do for public safety. And you look at the investments toward mental health and other public safety investments are good. We have to also recognize, good or bad, we are a wealthy city. That when you look at Amazon's record profits, Amazon made $60 billion last year. The year before they made $30 billion. Microsoft, $80 billion. We are, there's an article that came out today about how wealthy this city is. And so we have to protect our infrastructure. We have to reinvest in ourselves if we're going to be the great city. And so that was a decision we made for public safety, for mental health, for investments to be the great city that we can become.
Candidate Wilson, would you support that?
I am very concerned with continual increases to the sales tax as the way that we kind of fund a lot of things in the city. At the same time, this is a tool that was given to us by the legislature, and we are not often given new funding tools by the legislature. So it's a challenging situation. I definitely support the investments that are proposed. They're all good things. One thing that does concern me, however, is that a portion of this is not actually being used to invest in new public safety measures, but is actually being used to backfill part of the budget deficit. And I would prefer that we take the lead on new progressive revenue, for example, through a local capital gains tax, so that we're not asking Seattle residents to pay more sales tax, which is a very regressive tax, just to backfill our budget deficit.
Okay, thank you.
So I have to interject. I know we're going to talk about taxes a little bit more later, but you're suggesting perhaps a capital gains tax for the city. Okay, and that's because I was looking, I have to just be frank with you. I started researching like how many taxes have been passed just in the last 5 years and counted at least 4, like some property and several of them. You were involved in the Jumpstart tax, yep, which was for large businesses. That's right. So are you thinking that the city of Seattle is ready for another tax like that?
I think we have to look at that because the fact is that we still have a massive budget deficit, and that's a problem that has not been solved in the current budget. There's still, I believe, $140 million shortfall projected for next year that the next mayor, whether that's me or a current mayor, is going to have to deal with at that point. So we have this structural budget deficit that continues to be a problem. And again, the current budget proposal is basically taking a lot of funds from the Jumpstart tax, which I did lead on designing and passing, that were intended originally additionally for affordable housing, for the Equitable Development Initiative, for Green New Deal climate programs. So we're still kind of using stopgap measures every single year to balance our budget, and we really need to look at a structural solution.
Okay. All right, let's move on to public safety. I'm going to start with you, Candidate Wilson. What is, you're newer to the political scene, obviously not new to being an activist. So we'd love to know your position on crime. People are committing crimes and they're back on the street in no time, it seems. As a resident of Seattle, what is your take on what feels to some like a revolving door?
Well, I will say that I am against crime. Yeah, I mean, I think as I've been talking with people in neighborhoods around the city, we definitely have a public safety problem, right? Public safety remains a top issue for many voters this year, and with good reason, right? And I feel this myself, right? I'm a daily transit rider. I ride the bus, I ride the train, usually with my 2-year-old in tow, right? And there are definitely times when I've been in situations where I felt unsafe because someone was behaving aggressively or erratically. And in terms of what we need to do, I mean, there's a lot of things. So to keep it very short, part of this is meaningfully addressing our homelessness crisis, right? Because some of our public safety issues come from the fact there are so many people sleeping unsheltered with untreated mental illness and drug addiction, right? So that is one element. And also, we need to improve the way that we're doing policing. I have a lot of ideas about that, so I'm not going to go into all of it now. But we need a police department that is adequately staffed and that is responsive and that is accountable to the communities that it serves. And we do have a long way to go to get there.
Okay, I'm so glad you brought up policing because you talked about it being adequately staffed. I know at one point you did call for a 50% reduction in police. Do you still stand by that?
Absolutely not. I think I've been very clear in this campaign and in my platform about my stance on policing. And so, yes, we need to keep hiring officers. We do have a staffing crisis. But we also need to make sure that we're using the police capacity that we have wisely. And the fact is we still have officers performing many functions for which they're not necessary, right? There are other jurisdictions around the country that have gone much further than Seattle in civilianizing roles that we don't need sworn officers performing so that our police can actually focus on policing. So as mayor, I would like to make progress on that front so that we actually have the capacity to bring police response times down and to investigate serious crimes.
All right. Thank you so much. Mayor Harrell, you 60 seconds.
So adequately staffing was her answer. What does that mean? What you have to know is the right ratio, 1.9 per 1,000 people. We need 1,500 officers. And for her to change her position just a couple of years later, that's good. That's good. But you are leading the defund movement. You are advancing positions that made no sense from a public safety standpoint. I need 7-minute response times. I need officers to be able to get out the car, know the communities. I need to recruit officers from the communities. I need officers to be able to do investigations and be able to solve domestic violence situations. This is why I need this many officers. I said in my opening statement, this is about trust. And when you hear terms like adequate staffing and yada yada, these lofty ideas, that's scary to me because an executive has to make tough decisions. I want everyone to be safe. I know the kinds of officers I need to keep our kids safe. And just saying adequate staffing, that is the most non-statement I've ever heard. And that's what you're getting, and that scares me as a person that lives in the city.
Okay, let's talk about what does scare a lot of people in the city, and that's the gun violence. There was a report, I know you've seen it, from the city auditor's office that it's risen a lot in the last decade, gun violence. The number increasing, this is shots fired, increasing nearly 200% in the last 10 years. In that same time frame, fatal shootings were up more than 200%. I want to acknowledge, and you mentioned this at the top, that we are seeing some improvements year to year, like we are trending in the right direction. But clearly there's still an issue. So I would just love for you to be specific and share that if you're reelected, what are your ideas and intentions to address this issue?
Absolutely. So if you look at actually the most recent data since I've been mayor, because we had a huge uptick during the COVID, that based on a very intentional public safety strategy, shots fired are down significantly, homicides are down 41%, serious crimes are down, property crimes are down. We are trending in the right direction, and it's not organic growth. It's looking at crime prevention through environmental design. It's looking at some of the technology we're using that certainly warrants another discussion. It looks at recruiting the right kind of officers to be proactive in proactive policing. So we're doing all these things to make sure we're trending in the right place and looking at what we call place-based policing. We know where there are certain areas that need a better approach. That's why we invest in community-based solutions. That's why you see through our investment strategy right now, you see community-based organizations preventing crimes before they occur. We have a holistic approach. Our care department, we are setting the national standard on what an unarmed response looks like. They're responding to thousands of calls. That frees up our officers to go out on priority one calls. And so our public safety approach, where again, I get calls from around the country from other mayors on how we're about to do that. And so yes, my police officers, our police officers, we're getting 5 guns a day off the street, 2,000 guns a year off the street, and we'll continue to do that work to keep the people in this city safe.
All right, Candidate Wilson, you have a minute.
Yeah, so I mean, it's great that crime is falling, but the fact is if you compare Seattle to national trends, what's happening now is that our crime is falling back to kind of that pre-pandemic average. But during our mayor's term, we actually had a spike that was much higher than the rest of the country. It's taken longer for crime to fall in Seattle than around the country. So that's not a great result. And, you know, our levels of gun violence are still far too high. We just had a fatal shooting in Capitol Hill, my neighborhood, a few days ago. And you know, over the past couple of weeks, I've actually been talking with a lot of mothers who've been impacted by the disease of gun violence, whose children have been shot. And it's just heartbreaking, right, the effect that this has on the family, on the whole community. So we absolutely need to do better. And we've seen other cities which have had much more dramatic declines in gun violence, and especially in youth gun violence, than Seattle, right? Baltimore and Boston are two kind of shining examples. So I really think we need to learn from the example of those cities. And what that auditor's report found is that we lack that kind of overarching strategic evidence-based framework. So we have a lot of great community organizations that are doing really important work in this space, but we need that leadership from the city that puts all those pieces together in the right way.
I want to talk about police relations in communities of color. There are a lot of Seattle police officers that are either watching tonight or are going to watch this. Personally, over the last 18 years, I have comforted, counseled, prayed with, and worked to help many families of black victims murdered in Seattle try to get justice. Most have gone unsolved. No arrest has been made because there's a lack of cooperation and trust between those who know something and the police. Candidate Wilson, if elected, what specific steps would you do to foster better relations between the department and marginalized communities to increase that trust?
Yeah, that's a great question. I was just having a conversation the other day where some folks who live in the Rainier Valley were telling me that they know people who've been hired recently onto the police force and who grew up in that neighborhood, and they're being assigned to police work in like North Seattle and vice versa. And so I really think that we have some work to do. You know, if we have police officers who've come up in a specific neighborhood, they should be working in that neighborhood where they have those relationships, right? So ideally, we're hiring people from within the neighborhoods that they're going to be serving in. And then I think also moving toward more of a community policing model where police officers are embedded in a specific neighborhood, you know, have those relationships with the community and are acting as problem-solving partners, right, as opposed to just reacting when an incident occurs. So I think we can do a lot with building those relationships and changing the kind of models of policing that we're using and really designing approaches neighborhood by neighborhood.
Mayor Harrell?
Well, once again, those are some pretty good ideas, actually. I don't mean that in a patronizingly way. They're just completely hypocritical to what she's been saying for the last 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years. Completely hypocritical. That what we have to do, number one, is we do need more officers, and they must be culturally competent. Remember, I was public safety chair for 4 years. I was vice chair for 4 years. I have 8 years of public safety experience. My first cousin, our father's brothers, was a police officer for SPD as an African-American woman. These are my friends. They know that I want my community protected. So you have to develop trust. And you develop trust by, you have to earn it. And so under our administration, I went to every precinct, talked to every officer, looked them in the eye, and I said this: let's talk about George Floyd. I think this man was murdered. This can't happen here in Seattle. I want you to trust me and I'll trust you. And what we're able to do, when we were under the consent decree 12 years ago, 1 out of every 5 incidents, unreasonable force was used. Now we set a national standard. It's less than 1%. Judge Robar, who's probably the toughest judge for accountability, terminated that consent decree because our officers are doing what they're supposed to do. Lead by loving the community. And she's absolutely right. Recruit from the communities, and that one-off, you talked about someone not patrolling in their neighborhood, that might have been a one-off. I don't know who you're talking about, because that's exactly what captains do. And our chief, Sean Barnes, he's an outstanding PhD, Marine, smart guy. He knows how to put people in the right communities. And so that one-off she described is not how we're policing right now.
Ken Wilson, a lot of Seattle police officers retired or went to other departments because they felt like city leaders did not support them. Will you support Seattle police officers, work with the union to make sure they are happy and serving the city in the best way they can, motivated, and helping them in their relations with the community? Will you support officers that are out there trying to protect us?
You know, our police are public servants, and they also have a really hard job, right? They're on the front lines of the homelessness crisis, of all of the very challenging social issues that our city is facing right now. And I think we need to recognize that. And that's, you know, part of building those relationships with the community where there is that trust and there is that recognition of their role, right? So absolutely, I will do that. And I also believe that we do need to expect high levels of professionalism and accountability. And to speak to what the mayor was just speaking about with the consent decree, it's true that the consent decree was lifted, but that does not mean that our accountability problems are solved. The fact is that we have a 2017 accountability ordinance that was at that time considered one of the best in the nation, but most of that ordinance has not actually been implemented because it has been superseded by the police contract. So we actually have a long way to go to make sure that we have a proper accountability system in place. And as mayor, I will work to make sure that we move in that direction.
Okay, let's go to this. I'm a little embarrassed to talk about this one, but I think we need to have the discussion, okay? But I know I'm not alone, so bear with me. Leaving home in the city often means I have to plan where I'm going to go to the restroom. We are severely lacking in public restrooms, and small businesses already struggling or having to pick up the slack. I love the new public restroom at the waterfront. Oh my gosh, it is amazing. It is phenomenal. I love it. Mayor, given the need, why don't we see more of these across the city, and do you have a plan moving forward to address this hygienic issue?
Absolutely. Nothing to be embarrassed about to talk about. So you saw when I became mayor, and again, I've dealt with $600 million of deficits since I've been in office. But I said we're going to open up all of our parks bathrooms and our community centers. We're going to make sure that they're clean. Right now, we have 15 projects for bathroom renovations underway. Right now, we have $2 million for restoration work on your issue. You're right. We've staffed bathrooms like down at the waterfront or in the CID as an example. So I'm with you. We've been investing in that regard. I have to remind you that the bathroom issue is a county issue, and we pay about $30 to $40 million into the health system. So when you interview King County executives for their job, make sure that the bathroom issue is indeed a high priority for them, but we're doing what we can to make sure everyone has a place. Everyone has a right to go to the restroom. I don't want anyone to have to, you know, do it publicly, and so our hearts go out for them, and our investment strategy has followed our heart.
Okay. Candidate Wilson, you want to weigh in on this topic?
I really do, yeah. With respect, this is a city issue. And, you know, our mayor threw out a lot of numbers, but as someone who's out and about in the city every day, usually with my toddler, this problem is not solved, right? We do not have nearly enough public restrooms, and the ones that we have are often closed or dirty or dangerous. And so we have a long way to go on this. And I have some ideas in my platform about how to get there. And, you know, really, when we look at other cities, like even San Francisco, right, which has some of the same issues with homelessness and public safety that we do, they've actually done a lot better at providing clean, well-staffed public restrooms. So I think we can look at what they've done. There's some good research out there about ways to do it. Another thing I would like to explore, at least in the short term, is can we have partnerships with small businesses where if they're willing to make their restroom available, and institutions too, right, because there's restrooms all over the city, just many of them are private, right? So if institutions or small businesses are willing to make their restroom available to the public, can the city support with that, right, through help with cleaning, help with, maybe small grants or something like that. So I think that there's things we can do even in the short term before we actually create whole new public restrooms.
I want to talk about something that's been in the news recently. The Seattle City Council approved expanding surveillance cameras in areas like the Stadium District around Cal Anderson Park and by Garfield High School. That move has drawn criticism from those concerned about privacy and praise from those who say they are needed to help identify suspects in crimes. Mayor Harrell, how can you ensure voters that that video and that information gathered is not going to be used by ICE or other federal agencies?
Yeah. First of all, we realize people freak out when they talk about governmental surveillance. That's exactly why I authored the privacy surveillance ordinance. So I want to say three things. Number one, we have the safeguards in place. Only 28 people in the police department have access to it, number one. And it will be audited as to what they do with it, number two. So we have a lot of safeguards. For example, I've said publicly I will shut it down if the Trump administration or there's ICE raids or something like that and they're trying to get it. Under RCW 1093-160, which is to keep Washington working, it's very clear that we're not to cooperate with the federal authorities. Now, you have to realize something. There was a shooting last night that happened on 12th and Jackson. We were able to apprehend the alleged defendant in this matter because of RTCC, because of CCTV in this situation, because of video. There was a situation on Capitol Hill that we could have caught the person. We need to get first responders to the scene as fast as possible, and we want good information on who the suspect is. The other thing is, in developing this policy, it's in about 300 cities right now. It's in major cities. We're a little behind on this good technology. But I've talked to the father of the kid who was killed at Garfield. I talked to the mother of the daughter that was shot around at a bus stop. So my charter responsibility is not to defund that she's apparently not a big fan of now. My responsibility is to use best practices and smart technology and keep the safeguards in place to protect the immigrant and refugee community and the community I grew up in.
Candidate Wilson, if you are elected mayor, would you roll back this expansion program of surveillance cameras?
I mean, I would seriously consider that, and I would work with community organizations and other stakeholders to figure out what our plan is moving forward, because I am very concerned based on what I'm hearing from those organizations. So we've seen immigrant rights groups, civil rights groups express grave concerns about using this moment to massively expand surveillance technology around our city, right? So when Trump sent federal troops into D.C., they took control of that city's real-time crime center and had access to those CCTV camera footage. I just want to quote from the member of color caucus in the legislature, which sent a letter to the city expressing their concerns. They said, this technology has recently been in the news for its failure to be meaningfully and consistently secured, leading to breaches that could result in sensitive data being shared with ICE and putting our immigrant and refugee communities at risk. So I'm taking the lead from folks like them, and I think this is very concerning, and we will need to reconsider.
Could I respond to that?
Yes, sir.
So she's considering it. See, when I talk about an executive has to make tough decisions, okay? There's not been one city in this country that's had to fork up this stuff to the federal government. Not one. D.C. is not a city, okay? So we have in this state, number one, the privacy surveillance ordinance that I authored. We have the Keep Washington Working Act that is good law in this state. I've already authorized 3 lawsuits against the Trump administration. We will protect this information. We have an audit system by which we can determine who gets access to this. I've said I will shut it down if it gets into the wrong hands. I created, actually, in our bias-free policing law, I created a private cause of action. So if we violate our rules, we can be sued. And I am an attorney. So she says stuff like, we'll consider it. I need the voters to know that an executive has to make, we want to know where people stand right now. Because if she opposes it, just say she'll oppose it and take it down. That's a fair statement. And so during these debates, what I have to do is sort of pull out the lofty, something's interesting, or I'll consider it, into concrete decisions, because that's what an executive is forced to do to make the city as great as we could possibly make it to protect everybody.
I have a clarifying question. You mentioned all the cities that are using these cameras, and you said the federal government hasn't tapped into them yet. What about other states? I know there have been cases of, let's say, someone seeking an abortion and other states tapping into cameras in other states to track people down. What about that? Is that something that I forgot the full name of it right now, the Privacy Act. Yeah. Does it prevent other states from accessing?
So Sonny mentioned reproductive care, because what I did after the Roe v. Wade conversation with Trump, I modified our welcoming status to include women that are coming here for reproductive care, to make sure that our police department would not enforce a warrant from another state. So our state is protected under the Keep Washington Working Act. That's why I cited that particular statute. So Washington is in good state, so I'm not going to opine on other states like Texas. In fact, there are cities in Texas that have voluntarily given some of these types of information, and that's some of the people that are opposed to the technology. And let me be transparent here. I understand the opposition to the technology. Cameras freak me out. Okay, so I'm not suggesting that this is just good technology with the right safeguards in place, and we have the safeguards in place. But I can't opine on Texas law, and I won't do that.
Well, I wasn't meaning Texas law, but the ability to tap into our system. Were you going to say something?
Yeah, I just wanted to bring this back to the question of information security, because I think we've already seen in Washington state, right, the Washington Department of Licensing and the Washington Healthcare Authority, personal information collected by those agencies was given to the federal government despite safeguards. So it's nice to have good intentions about security and guardrails, but Trump doesn't respect laws. So I think we need to be very careful.
So there was a woman that came to the press conference yesterday. I won't say her name. She wants this technology because she is a daycare owner, and there were bullets shot around her daycare with her toddlers. Again, I talked to the mother of the daughter that was shot at a bus stop. They support this technology because they want us to get first responders in place quickly, number one. But number two, they want us to get good intelligence and not make bad arrests or false arrests. So we're willing to use it, to safeguard it, and to protect our communities, and that's what we have to do.
So if we're talking about safeguarding our kids, I want both of you just to be on the record. Do you support returning Seattle police officers to school grounds like Garfield to get them back on school grounds to prevent violence in the classrooms? Candidate Wilson.
Does this have to be yes or no, or can I explain?
Yes, I'd like, because the school board is going to talk about it and vote on it in October.
At this point, no.
Okay, you do not think officers should be in the schools?
No, and the reason is that I think the evidence that we have from the research, I've talked with lots of experts in gun violence and school safety, and the research that we have suggests that police officers in schools do not actually make people safer and can have adverse effects, especially on minority students. So looking at that research, I'm not sure that this is the right way to address the very real problem of safety in schools.
Mayor, this happened on your watch at Garfield. What are your thoughts on this?
So I'll answer yes to a yes or no question.
Thank you.
And with the assumption that the students and the teachers and the principal want it and the parents want it. I grew up with a police officer at Garfield High School, and I attended there. You have to have the right kind of officer. Now, I'm very willing to have an unarmed officer in there to build the relationships. We have an armed officer walking the school grounds now at Garfield as an example. But make no mistake about it, these kids are walking around traumatized. They have to go on lockdowns. There's shooters in schools these days. I have to protect these students. And I don't want an unarmed person necessarily walking in a hallway when there could be a possible shooter. So we're willing to go slow, meet the schools where they are, but I want them to be safe. So eventually, if an armed officer that the kids trust, the students trust, and the administrators trust, that could be a good method by which we can protect them.
I think you have a viewer question, right?
I do have a viewer question. This is from voter Margot Jones. Living in the heart of Seattle and owning a business in the Mount Baker Art Lofts, I continually encounter and see people addicted to drugs up and down the Rainier Avenue corridor, lined up, and bus stops, on the street, and uncamping behind the light rail station at Mount Baker, which is not healthy for patrons, supporting my business or the children at the daycare in the building. The effects of car break-ins, burglary, violence, filth, and out-of-control drug use is something never seen like this in Seattle. What are you going to do about it to keep people and help support businesses fighting to survive these conditions? Reimbursable grants are not enough. Ms. Wilson, what would your plan of action be to address this?
Yeah, I think this is a really important question, and that's very consistent with the things that I've been hearing as I've talked with folks around the city. And also, I mean, honestly, where my daughter goes to daycare, there's some issues in that neighborhood too. So, yeah, I mean, I think that we need, there's a few elements to this, right? And part of it is police response, but part of it too is the right kind of proactive outreach to folks in those areas who are doing drugs. And, you know, we have successful programs like the LEAD program, for example, right? Diversion programs where we're not talking about arresting everyone and throwing them into jail, because we also know that that does not work. But we can divert people into housing or shelter with services and long-term case management. Now, what we need for that to be successful is deeper investment, right? And over the last few years, unfortunately, funding for the LEAD program has been deeply cut by this administration. But we also need the funding for that long-term support that those people are going to need to be successful. possible. So I believe we need to make deeper investments in this area because it's really a big problem.
Mayor Harrell?
So you have people that are sick, that are killing themselves with drugs, and they are supporting their habits through crime. So our holistic approach are to go upstream to make sure they're getting the help they need. Sometimes it could be buprenorphine that we allow our first responders to now administer. First city in the country to do that. We've reduced fentanyl deaths, overdose deaths by dramatic numbers. I want to say 20 to 30%. So we have to treat people. We have to get them, and we have to build the right facilities. We have a crisis care center coming online. We have the Orca Center that we opened. So we have to treat them aggressively. Again, this is the neighborhoods that I grew up in. I know this area quite well. But we also have to make good arrests when people are harming others. And so that's why I need, and I'm not afraid to say this, 1,500 officers to be able to have them walk the streets. And the economic development piece that we're doing for the businesses, let's not overlook that. That's why we put a storefront repair fund in there. That's why I put that in the budget. That's why we have a capital access program such that they could, if their windows are broken or they need help on the lease, we will help pay for that. Under our administration, we've probably been the strongest supporter of small businesses in recent history for a mayor, because I need these small businesses to stay alive. So we'll help them on the damages caused, make the arrest, and treat the people that need to be treated.
All right. We're going to transportation, parking, accessibility next. As a legacy, this is from a viewer. As a legacy homeowner in Central Seattle, I can't park in my own home of 30 years. And what used to take me 5 minutes to go to Columbia City now takes 25 due to bike and bus lanes. Candidate Wilson, is it your plan for the city to look like New York by depending on mass transit?
I do support mass transit, and I do support bike lanes and bus lanes generally. And I'll tell you why. We have a growing region, right? People have been moving to our city in droves over the last 10, 20 years, and they are going to continue to move to our city. And we have a problem of geometry. We cannot keep adding cars to the road. And so in order for the people who do have to drive, and I absolutely recognize that many people have to drive, in order for them to continue to drive and not be stuck in traffic, we have to make it possible for more and more of the folks living here and moving to the city to not drive, right? And so that's why it's really important that we are investing in our transit system and making it fast and frequent, so that I mean, that's really what is going to allow a transportation system moving into the future that it works for everyone, including people who drive.
Mayor Harrell, would you like to respond to that? And then I have a question along those lines.
But just 30 seconds, because we're winding down.
What we do, we're very data-based in our Seattle Department of Transportation. The fact is there are fewer cars here than were 5 years ago. 463,000 vehicles in 2017, only 388,000 now. So we use the data, the science to make sure parking needs are met, and we'll continue to do that. I'll move on to the next question.
So driver gridlock, we've talked about, it's become a frustrating problem for some commuters in Seattle. The Department of Transportation has increased the number of bus-only lanes. SDOT recently ruled out adding bus lanes on the most congested part of Denny Way because it would significantly increase delays for drivers on Denny Way. Mayor Harrell, what's your solution to this complicated problem of congestion in the city so that's fair for everybody? Some people do want to drive their cars.
So I think you're referring to the issue in Denny in your question, and I think that's the Route 8 bus lane that we have to admit that is a choke point in the city. We have a lot of work to do. I've directed SDOT to look at that particular area to come up with the best solutions that are out there. And we have to realize that the Revive I-5 project is coming very shortly. We've experienced that, and so this is a very problematic area. So what we're doing, again, the reason I look at the data for how many cars we're having, when I actually cited the reduction of cars, 140 cars per household for 100, down to 127. Now, we're trending in the right direction. But we have to look at our roads as a shared asset. And we get criticized for bike lanes, as an example, protected bike lanes, which is, by the way, a climate justice project that we're doing. I've been the first mayor to actually bring the ecosystem of transportation, whether it's bike, industrial usage, cars, transit. I've been the first mayor to pull this ecosystem, and that's how we're able to pass a $1.55 billion levy. And that's what it's going to take, a mayor that looks at the full ecosystem and always leading with safety. And that's what we're doing. That's what we'll continue to do on my second term.
All right, Candidate Wilson.
I mean, I definitely agree with leading with safety, and we have a long way to go on that front. We still have very dangerous roads in Seattle, Rainier Ave, MLK, Lake City Way, right? These are some of our city's most dangerous streets, and they've been historically disinvested in. So, I think that one of the really important things coming up for the next 4 years as we're looking at actually implementing that transportation levy is making sure that we're spending those dollars wisely and that we're getting the safety investment that we need.
Okay, we're going to talk about doing business in Seattle. We've touched on that a little bit. Candidate Wilson, what is your understanding of the restaurant industry and their struggles? As mayor of Seattle, what would you propose to help preserve the city? And this is from a viewer, by the way, a restaurant owner. Okay. What would you propose to help preserve our city's precious restaurant industry, which is a major employer, a significant source of entertainment, and an important part of our local economy? So what is your understanding of the restaurant industry and the struggles?
Yes. I mean, I agree with all of that. The restaurant industry is incredibly important to our economy and just to the vitality of our city, right? Like, you live in a neighborhood, you want to go out, have fun, and there's great restaurants. Like, that's just part of what makes living in a city like Seattle great. So we need to make sure that we have the conditions for a thriving restaurant industry. And I will say that right now is a hard time to run a restaurant, right? The cost of everything is extremely high. The cost of rent, the cost of insurance, the cost of wages, the cost of food, everything. So I've talked to lots of restaurant owners around the city in the course of this campaign, and I understand that people are struggling. There's a lot to say about why and what the city can do about it, but I will say one thing is really the more we can really tackle the housing crisis, that actually helps restaurants, right? Because part of the reason why restaurants are having to pay high wages to hire and retain good staff is because workers can't afford to live in the neighborhood where they work, and it makes it very hard. So you have high turnover. So helping with housing costs can help that. And also, lots of people who live in the neighborhood, because they're spending so much on their housing costs, they don't have the disposable income to go out to eat all the time, right? So there's lots of ways that the housing crisis actually feeds into the struggles that restaurants are facing today. There's lots of other things too, but I think that's something important to point out.
Yeah. Mayor Harrell.
Well, I'm sorry. I just heard a description of the problem. I didn't hear any solutions. So let me just put forth some solutions that we're actually working on. Number one, we'll issue an executive order tomorrow that will actually exempt many of the small businesses from the permit process that we're doing. We are right. We have to recognize that we have a very aggressive minimum wage, and I'm proud of it. I was one of the negotiators of the minimum wage. This does make it very tough on some small businesses. That's why we proposed, we think, the strongest B&O tax policy in the city's history to exempt almost all of those businesses from the B&O tax. 90% of the businesses will get a tax break. 76% of them will be completely exempt. So this will help them at the bottom line. The other projects we've done, for example, the Liberty Project, where they can actually get strategic planning, human resource expertise through our project we're doing with the University of Washington, Seattle University Business School. We have the Capital Access Program, where 300 businesses have participated. Over $7 million worth of money is given to them to help them. We have the storefront repair fund. Again, if their window is broken through no fault of their own, we're out there for them. So we are doing real work to support these small businesses. We pulled together a small business. We pulled together a small business task force. These answers came from them.
Okay, we're getting close to the end of the time, but I want to ask real quick questions. Ms. Wilson, if elected, would you be able to work with the City Council, or are you going to push for a more progressive council to be elected?
I will absolutely work with every single council office. I think it's incredibly important that the mayor has a good working relationship with every single council office. And honestly, I think that even though we might not be aligned on all issues, I really think that we can make progress and we can pass good legislation that will improve the quality of life for people in this city. I believe that every single council member on the council now really wants to make progress on homelessness, on public safety, on other issues that are of concern to their constituents. So absolutely, I will work with them, and I believe we can make progress.
Mayor Harrell, shortly after you were elected, you told me you just need time to implement your plan and to get the right city council to help you do that. You have the right city council. We still have a lot of problems. What more do you need?
Number one, I need a fully staffed police department, but a holistic public safety response. That includes the care department, the police department, the community-based organization doing upstream work, number one. Number two, we can solve homelessness. Make no mistake about that. We need a regional effort to do that, and that's why I'm pushing so much for the land, the resources, because a regional solution is still the answer. We can't solve it in Seattle alone. Like I said, most of the people that are homeless in Seattle did not become unhoused in Seattle. 70% of the people here did not become unhoused in Seattle. And last, we need stable leadership. This is a tough job. This is a big job. This is not something you take lightly. It's an $8 billion budget. She's only managed like a $200,000 budget. I need stability in the government, and we've hired some superstars in city government, and I just need to be able to go on the path forward.
All right, and with that, we will have to go to our closing statements. So, Mayor Harrell, you will get to go first.
All right. Well,
there is 1 minute, 45 seconds left, so please keep it brief.
I will keep it brief. So I have 1 minute, 2 minutes.
A little less, 45 seconds if you can.
Okay. Well, I have not changed my positions on critical issues. You elected me to tackle homelessness, expand housing, restore a sense of safety. I've delivered strong results. The fact is you have a choice here. The election is a choice between a mayor who's rebuilt our public safety infrastructure, launched a third department. You have a choice between a mayor who has managed our city's multi-billion-dollar budget and someone that has been unable to manage her small $200,000 budget. Yours is a choice between a mayor who's turned progressive ideas into action. That will be me. Trump will walk over people with no experience.
I have to interrupt you. I'm sorry. Ms. Wilson, you have 45 seconds.
Thank you. I have not spent my career aspiring to hold elected office. I decided to run for mayor because I saw that we are in a moment that calls for new ideas and new leadership, a moment when working people and communities across our city are struggling and not feeling like their voices are being heard in the halls of power. I'm proud to have earned the endorsement of MLK Labor, representing more than 150 unions and 220,000 workers across our region, and Protect 17, the largest union of city employees, which has faith in my leadership. King County Democrats and every single Democrat group in Seattle, State Senator Rebecca Saldana, former Seattle City Council member Tammy Morales, and community leaders including Cynthia Green,
I'm sorry, I'm going to have to stop you as well. Thank you both.
At least it happened to both of you. Thank you so much for your time. That's all the time we have. Check out the full debate on whereweconverge.com's YouTube.
Dive into the Fox Local app and discover live local news and more from Fox 13 Seattle. With all of our original shows streaming free on your smart TV. The Fox Local app has you covered. Stream Good Day Seattle live and get breaking news throughout the day. Download the Fox Local app on your smart TV now. Available on all streaming platforms.
At Buhoff Law, most of our clients call us within days of their car accident.
Why? Because they know the clock is ticking to get the money they deserve. And they know the right medical care now could mean a faster recovery. So how long's it been since your accident? And how long have you put off calling a lawyer? Don't wait any longer.
Call Buhoff Law, 206-451-1111.
Better off with Buhoff.
It's the most epic showdown of the year. Midget Wrestling Warriors. These pint-sized powerhouses bring the wildest wrestling mayhem you've ever seen. Friday, September 26th. Get tickets now at muckleshootcasino.com.
It's the Harley Exteriors Fall Sale. Call Harley today and install your new windows now with no payments and no interest until 2026. And buy one window and get the second at 40% off.
Looks like it's time to call Harley Exteriors.
Stream live news and more from Fox 13 Seattle on the Fox Local app. Available on all streaming platforms.